This is a transmission from the future, from a civilization that crossed the threshold into optimal life. The path to Utopia was messy, full of experiments, failures, and flashes of insight. These are fragments from that journey, conversations with the thinkers and builders who reimagined how we live, connect, and evolve. Welcome to Utopia in Beta. Paradise began as a prototype.
Hello and welcome to the Utopia in Beta podcast. I'm Isabelle Castro and today I'm joined by Dan Thompson from Noma Collective. And for once, we're both in the same country, but at completely different ends of it. How are you today, Dan?
I'm good. I'm really good. Yeah, back in my base in Merida. Just a short 2-hour flight from you, so that's probably the closest we're going to get for now. But yeah, all well. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm happy to be in Oaxaca. It's so beautiful here. And yeah, I think aside from NS, when we were both together and I think that was the second time we met in person. This is probably the closest that will be remotely. And I think the first time that we met was last year around Edge City. And I always enjoy chatting to you about the network state stuff because you came to it pretty organically from the whole digital nomad kind of zeitgeist. But I thought today we could start off just to give our listeners a little bit of a background about you telling a bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So, yeah, I've been remote since 2012. My background's in large-scale music festivals. Predominantly for my 20s and early 30s, I was doing that and arts members clubs and music events that are one day, but generally, all around creating platforms via music for people to come together. And then around about 2017, I started to want to do kind of events that were slightly less capacity and like more focused on experience. A lot of the reason for that was initially just that more people, more problems, more variables. And so kind of trying to bring that down. You also don't want to be the old person at the party. And like I started to feel that a little bit. So initially, the idea was more around kind of, I saw this gap in the market, which I think is still a gap, which is that there's kind of our generation want the comfort of a Marriott, but they want the vibe of a hostel. And I think fundamental kind of layer when you're traveling is that there is that want to have comfort, but also this sense of community and vibe, which hostels do really well. It's just like, didn't want the bunk bed. And so I was working on an experiential focused hotel, essentially would be kind of the project. If anyone knows of Selena, kind of that was kind of the vibe we were thinking about. And then COVID hit, everything got put on pause and I found myself looking after a hotel in Belize. And that was when we rolled the dice on this kind of pop-up co-live concept. Really wanting digital nomads or people with remote work jobs to be able to kind of transition into the digital nomad lifestyle. For me, it's just really about freedom. It's always been about freedom. Like, remote work gives you the freedom to do what you want when you want. And that's really important for me. So I wanted to help people on their journey. And what I've come to realize is most people don't do it out of fear, fear and friction. So we started up this digital nomad travel company. It grew and kind of about a year into that journey, someone passed me the Network State book and they were like, hey, like you need to read this. This is really important. You're doing this. You just don't know it yet. Like read it. Let me know. And he was right. And I started kind of following this movement. And I think at that point it was the first conference. So there really wasn't any kind of, not the same traction that we see now. There wasn't permanent hubs. There was kind of like, I think at that point, Zuzalu, the first one in Montenegro, just happened. So this is very early in that space. Prospera, I don't think had built anything in the Beta district, and so yeah, it was relatively early on. And it was a kind of about 6 months before we met. I had kind of transitioned a bit more from like crazy startup mode into like wanting to go out and meet people and go to conferences and kind of make my, the presence felt, and also just meet people, that were in this space. And so that's when we started going out to places, and that's kind of where we met, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it kind of comes across to me as if this was kind of a natural progression from what you were doing before and the digital nomad focus to network states, which actually, I mean, maybe network states is a natural progression in itself. What has kind of surprised you about repositioning yourself towards the network state focus rather than what you were doing kind of before and the more digital nomad focus?
So I think it's all about nomenclature. It's all about definitions. So I don't think it's like a pivot. It's like we didn't have the words and we didn't have the structure, and network state was like, as a concept, was like, oh, that's where we're all leading to. It's like I knew that was where I wanted to go. I just didn't have the words to explain it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think like looking at the digital nomad space, and this is what I said kind of in this my first foray into writing, was that I actually think digital nomadism is like a stage in a much larger ecosystem. Like it's a moment, not the movement. And I think the movement is much bigger than that. And I think we need to do a better job at breaking down those stages and putting words aligned with them so that we have the appropriate definitions to explain what we're doing. Because if you look at like most people's journey through digital nomading, they end up, putting some roots down in some places. They end up probably getting radicalized and becoming more libertarian because they see the opportunities of things like better tax brackets for them, or kind of building this. I like to say things like, building your personal stack, like where am I going to pay taxes? Where do I want to spend my time? These are all things that are becoming commoditized. And really that's what made the network state movement so interesting, because I saw this end goal, basically. I saw it like, okay, that's where we're all leading to.
Mm-hmm. And where are you right now with what you're doing? Have you got a permanent place yet? Where are we going with this?
It's a great question. So, in terms of the core product, we're expanding into more locations. We're really wanting to offer an opportunity to go to anywhere in the world and start your journey. And then from a perspective of the full ecosystem, kind of breaking it down into three kind of layers, if you will. You've got this physical layer, which I'll tell you a bit more, and we definitely have some permanent hubs on the horizon. I'll get into that in a sec. Then you have this kind of digital layer, which is kind of where all these people are going to talk, connect, pay when they're not in the physical space together. And then I think what's most interesting that's come out of the network state movement is this governance layer. Like, we're able to make decisions on things that we previously weren't able to, like where am I going to pay my taxes, for example. So we're I'm looking at the ecosystem as like, I have these stages of the life cycle of someone that ends in like a multi-generational network society. And then as a company and a community, I want to be able to solve the problems that you face at each one of these stages. So when you're just starting, you may need help getting a remote work job. When you're just starting your travels, you may want to help just finding community or finding a co-working space. When you're a digital nomad, you're wanting to know about eSIMs and perhaps visas. And then when once you're starting to put down roots somewhere, it starts to kind of go full circle to these permanent hubs. Are you purchasing real estate? Are you looking for a place to put your kid into school? What does that school look like? What are these villages? What do these physical places look like? And so in the hours and hours of conversation that we've had within, the network state, leaders and the round table I was fortunate enough to be at when I was at NS was a lot about real estate. It's like, okay, how are we coming into the physical space? And I think, I'm really excited about the possibility of being able to open the door, kind of find the key and open the door to repurposing distressed real estate, both in urban and rural areas, right? And so I do find it really interesting so you've got Prospera is kind of the farthest along in terms of special economic zones, so really top down, having this autonomy, and they've gone both the distressed asset route and the build from scratch route, and I think it's really interesting to see how that's going, and there's a lot of learnings from that. And then I think it's really interesting what Frontier Tower are doing with respect to taking a distressed tower block in a city center and then repurposing that. I think that's super interesting. And then kind of where Noma's sitting is the rural version of that. So something I kind of, and I'm going to publish another article soon, but something that I've seen that's kind of led me to how we want to look at permanent hubs is the following. So I'll tell you a little story, kind of like 2 or 3 pieces that kind of led me to what we're going to do with hubs, with permanent hubs. So the first thing that I realized is you've got pop-ups and then you've got the permanent cell. And pop-ups are amazing for top of funnel, but very soon they become insufficient. If you start to get deeper, you do 3 or 4 pop-ups, it's not going where you want it to go. It feels insufficient. And then you've got this forever cell, which is slow and hard and loses momentum and is also quite scary. Come live here forever is a fucking scary thing. Right? So what I think we're missing is we're missing the middle between pop-up and the permanent. And one of the things, when looking at the two worlds that network states kind of is colliding, you've got the move fast, break things of the tech world, which is in the digital space. And then you've got real estate, which is like slow and difficult and capital heavy and labor intensive. And I think where we are in the network state space, these two spaces are like butting heads, they're crashing together. And I think what we need to do is we need to figure out like a mezzanine approach. How can we kind of take some of the learnings from the tech space in terms of scalability and speed, but also like we still need to build in the physical space. So real estate is going to be a thing, right? And so, and then the kind of the extra piece there that's led me to this kind of revelation, if you want to call it that, is I worked in temporary infrastructure for years, like getting to a field and turning it into a city for a week, right? And so one of the things that I want to solve is that most real estate developments struggle to get to critical mass because of the long timeline, and they lose momentum. If you ask anyone who's built like a eco village or whatever, they're going to be like, yeah, it's been really tough to maintain momentum in the year and a half that it took me to get permits and get everything together and get boots on the ground, right? So this has all led me to understand, to think that the way to solve this problem and to get to critical mass quickly is to use temporary infrastructure, so that within like 6 months or even shorter period of time, you can essentially allow for physical infrastructure, temporary physical infrastructure, to be in a rural piece of land, perhaps using some of the distressed assets like an old building or whatever. And essentially what that'll do is you'll be able to create that missing middle, and you'll be able to essentially shorten the time frame to get to critical mass by delivering temporary physical infrastructure. So that's the first thing I've been thinking about. And then the second thing I've been thinking about is, if you look at I've been to a bunch of these pop-ups, and I think we made an error in using the concept of like-minded people. I think actually that's wrong. I think that, getting a bunch of like-minded people together is what creates a monoculture and what creates stagnation. A society is not one group of people. It's actually a bunch of different people. They may be aligned on like a higher moral, ethical concept, but actually could have a bunch of disagreements and like completely different things. I think like that's actually what creates a culture in a society. And me also coming from outside of the space, I think for us to be able to deliver a functioning society, we're going to need to go to doctors, we're going to need to go to architects, we need to go to festival owners, we need to go all of the people who work in agriculture, running farms, and then people into governance and people who are into funding and all of these things. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday about finance vehicles for people to build houses quickly. Those are all integral parts of how a society functions, right? And so if you can essentially shorten the time frame for critical mass, and then you can do cast a wide net and actually through appropriate marketing and destination marketing, like what I did with music festivals, bring together all of these communities that are at the pinnacle of expertise and the frontier of their industries, put them all into this physical space that has that temporary infrastructure ready to receive them. What you're going to create is an actual physical sandbox, like to trial out all of these things. If you have number one, shortening the time frame to critical mass, you have number two, which is all of these communities so that you can get to like a good number of people. What I think opens up is a new business model, which essentially is like where I think we're going to meet in the middle between, the tech space and the real estate space, which is having people pay a subscription model. And with that subscription model and with their physical contribution, they will vest ownership of land over a period of like 2 years, let's say. And then what you can create is you've been able to create value from rural land, lower the barrier to entry for people to get on the property ladder. And you've essentially created a kind of society as a service SaaS model that people gain ownership, but also creates really good ARRs. So this is like my new experiment, vision, thought process that I have to try and work out, either fail or succeed, but I'm going to do it. So this has all led me to go, we are looking at pieces of land that have distressed real estate, some in like Southern Europe, some in Costa Rica, some in Asia and Thailand. And we're essentially trying to find a place that has, let's say, like an old abandoned town, or maybe like a chateau that is kind of in not necessarily disrepair. You do really want a place that you can just jump into and have some places that work instantly. And then so we're essentially looking very closely, doing DD on several locations, and hope to be able to have a place where we can trial out this society as a service and this experiment, which I'm calling minimum viable society, to kind of find out what is the minimum viable society? What do we need for that to function? And yes, I'm pretty excited about that, because if we can trial out this new business model and we can actually get to critical mass quickly, I think what we will find is we will have essentially this like open source template for any community to go, okay, I'm going to go to this piece of rural land or urban, like tower, it doesn't really matter. And together in my community, hit the physical space quickly and be able to scale and get to critical mass. Yeah. So that's what I'm working on.
Okay, like that, there's a lot that you're working on there.
That's a full project that I'm working on. Yeah.
I think like with the critical mass element, I see a few projects kind of trying to work on that specifically. Like now, I know that Prospera did a event in London the other day, which I feel like was just trying to get the word out to more people and get more people interested. With attracting people to these new settlements, though, and you're going for kind of like remote workers primarily, I guess, because they're the easiest to kind of like up sticks and kind of like move place. But you're competing on a global stage with a lot of different other places which already have all the infrastructure needed. What do you think will attract people to these new settlements, to something that's just getting started, when they have, like, for example, Lisbon? I'm going to say Lisbon because so many digital nomads go there. When they've got Lisbon, which has everything there already, what do you think may bring people to come to these new places, and therefore you reach critical mass of a variety of different people from a variety of different kind of like industries, and get to the point where you're trying to go?
Yeah. Great question. So I think what bounds everyone together is the idea that they're not happy with the way it is and that they struggle to make a change in this existing systems. And so my theory is to kind of go to everyone who's looking at the frontier of their industry and say, here is this blank canvas sandbox. Would you like to come with a bunch of other frontier industries, come together and see if, with a little less bureaucracy in theory and a little bit more of like a blank slate, would you be interested in that? I think that's what galvanizes everyone. Like, if you want to just go and do something and you're not really worried about building something new, then yeah, go to Portugal. But I think the thing that's gonna make this particular project or experiment interesting is that opportunity to come together with a bunch of experts in their areas and have this full blank canvas sandbox.
Okay. And then there's the whole element of kind of designing for permanence and retention, because with digital nomads, I guess with what you just said, it's kind of a longer term vision that they'd be kind of buying into and kind of helping towards. But with your average kind of digital nomad, they're used to moving all the time. Mm-hmm. And I can imagine that retention is a problem. Like in networks, mm-hmm. There is some level of retention, but I know a lot of people were like, the people that I talked to were basing themselves there so that they could then travel to other places, if you get what mm-hmm. I mean. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do. So first of all, I think that like the type of societies that we're building are going to be a network of network states. Okay. Like, I don't think we're going to stop people traveling. I think what actually is a smarter play is be like, look, like, even if I can get you for 3 to 6 months of the year, and then I can also kind of like guide you to another place that's a similar concept, and we can kind of share those communities so that there could be like a flow. I actually think that's more realistic, because it's just everything we're doing is based on being a little bit more like transient. But I also do think that, although my core market are remote workers and digital nomads, for this particular kind of, for the hub, the permanent hub, it's got to be much bigger than that. And I'll kind of talk you through that a little bit. Like, not every couple is both digital nomads. What you actually normally get is like one is digital nomad and the other is like has to do something permanent, or is a stay-at-home mom, or is like whatever it is. And I think what I've started to realize is like, that's why these communities fail, is because actually just making a community of just digital nomads is bound to fail, because they're in a moment in their life that is exactly not, it's the opposite of what you're trying to sell. But at the same time, I keep hearing the similar viewpoints on places like NS or places like Prospera that are like, I'm not sure my gran would go there. I'm not sure my wife would be as happy with it, because she's not into like, frontier, like fucking governance structures, right? And so I think like really what you're actually going to get long term is, if you break out of those circles, you're going to need to create a place that has space for all different walks of life. And I think when you branch out, you're actually going to get more permanence, in my opinion, because you're going to have people who want to start businesses there. Yeah. People are going to want to spend more time there. And then I think that's how you go about it long term, in my opinion.
Okay. How big are the kind of plots of land that you're currently kind of considering?
So the one I'm most excited about is 144 hectares. Okay. So big. Yeah. And it's got like 70 hectares of vineyard, and it's got 70 hectares of raw land, and it's got like a big chateau with like 100 plus rooms, and it's got a river running through it, and it's close to the beach, close to airport. No, it's really cool. And I think like, there are a lot, like in a community, like so my dad went to like was part of a bunch of communes in the 60s as a musician, right? So when I'm telling him about these things, he was like, Dan, I've done this, bro, and like it doesn't work, like it always stagnates. And like I think but a community that only has transient people never gets to critical mass. A community that only has permanent people becomes closed-minded and stagnates. So I'm playing with this like 70-30 rule, by where you have 70% permanent residents and 30% people always flowing through. So you've got this anchor, and you've also got this new energy coming in. And I think that's actually how it works. Because I do think there is just people that you want there for a period of time, but aren't ever going to be permanent, but could add value 100%, and vice versa.
Okay. And how do you see kind of integration of kind of local populations within this?
The moment that we kind of pull the trigger on any location before we start like, coming in mass. We have to go and connect with the local community. Like, it's the number one most important thing. And I think we need to think about them as integral members of this community, and at all costs, whenever possible, use them to be part of the ecosystem. Like, one of the things that we're looking at is like, okay, so, it takes 2+ years normally to start any sort of real farming at a scale that you would be interested in doing. But we also want to be very, conscious of using and trying to be, local as much as possible in the produce that we're going to have in our local stores, right? So then it's like, well, the logical step would be, okay, yeah, totally bring in how some people are into agriculture. And I think there's some really awesome communities around agriculture that I would bring in to run those areas. But logically, you would just go to a local farm, make friends with them, and start to incorporate them into your ecosystem rather than trying to build something from scratch. They've been doing it in the local area for years. They have loads of expertise. Lean on them, bring them in, bring them business, get them to be part of the community, get them on the council. I don't think it's rocket science. I think it's just like, at every step of the way, make sure that they have a representative and a representation, and they're active in it and they see the value. That's, I think, just, how it is. You go to, the community in these places has been the same for 100 years, that they're totally feeling the pinch. They see that things are degrading. Like a lot of the places in every, from France to Italy to Spain to Portugal to Costa Rica and Thailand, like, all of these places that we're looking at are going through some sort of decline in the areas that we're looking at. That's the play, right? It's the same with network school. Like, they wouldn't be there if that was full of Chinese people and it had worked, that development, right? I think that's the same in this. So it's the balance of like, they know that something needs to happen, but they, logically they want to be a part of it if they're going to live there. So yeah, there are some really good examples of how to do this. There's a great co-live that's been doing really good work on this called Rural, I think it is. And they took over a town in the south of Spain, and they like properly integrated the local. There was like quite a few elders that were like wanting to be a part of this, and I guess what I'm saying is that you want to look around where this is being done well, bring those people in, and similarly with the local people who are open, right? You'll knock on 30 doors. Some people will close them in your face. Some people will be really open, and you just want to get the majority on side, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I guess within the context that you're talking about, these are kind of societies, settlements that are not looking for kind of diplomatic recognition, not looking for their own kind of governance allowances, because that adds a whole another element.
Level of complexity, yeah. So it's a really interesting question, and it's kind of evolved for me, honestly. Like initially, when I was thinking about this, I felt like there was going to be this one place that kind of gives you everything. And actually, I've changed my mind on that completely. And I'm looking at it more of this like network of states where you will build this kind of personal stack based on the different things you need. And so like, I'm more thinking about it like this, like, I may want to spend, because I love wine and I love the Southern, European culture. I may want to go and spend my summers in Italy or France. But I definitely like the likelihood of a special economic zone in those places in the current state of affairs is quite low. But now with the decoupling of your physical space and where you pay taxes, like I'm having amazing conversations in Paraguay and in Uruguay, like why not just set up the zone there and just do your taxes there and just live in the nice space when you want. And then you start to create, it's actually like, maybe there's 10 locations and they all serve slightly different functions, and you pay a subscription to be a part of all of them. And because you have decoupled your physical location with where you pay taxes, where you run your business, and maybe where all of the other things that you need, you can kind of like, you don't have to find one place that's perfect for everything. You can go to a jurisdiction that really wants you there and wants a special economic zone. And that doesn't have to be the place that you spend all year. You could just go there for a couple days of the year, or maybe you want to go there because you're setting up a factory. You go there, several times a year, but it's not necessarily needing to like have both where you're physically enjoying your time and where you want to raise your kids, but also where your business is and where you pay taxes. Like that doesn't need to be the same place anymore. So when you think about it like that, suddenly the world, this idea of a network of networks and picking and choosing places based on specific wants and needs starts to become really fucking cool, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I guess it's what a lot of people are starting to do anyway. It's just kind of made into a kind of package almost that you can just buy into this community around the world, and it'll be kind of, you don't have to go about it on your own. I know one person that I met at NS, and she is setting up a business in America, but her tax residency is going to be in Paraguay, but she's been doing this all herself. And obviously this is just one person, and she's got like advice on how to do it from other people that were in NS and all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, it's happening anyway. And then what you're proposing, it sounds like it's more making society as a service, right? It's like, it's almost like fitting into that.
Yeah. I mean, like there's a concept which I think, I'm basing a lot of these decisions on, which is that like there are kind of like two types of people in the world. There are like your trailblazers that will go without any sort of pathway and cut through the jungle, and they're like the people that are on the frontier. And then there's the rest of the people that need a little bit more of a template and a little bit more of a structure. And I think if you're wanting this to become mainstream, you're going to need to lay out the structure, because I think you're capping the world's trailblazers at like 5% maybe, right? And I think that's like what you're seeing a little bit with why digital nomadism is struggling to become mainstream. I actually think it's more about just like, if you leave it up to the person to figure it out all themselves, 9 times out of 10, those people won't do it. And it goes back to the same thing at the start. It's fear. Like fear is super powerful, and also like, friction or loneliness even, So yeah, I think like if in 5 years time, there was just a subscription that you could pay and you could sort your taxes out here and you could have your holidays here and you could be here, and, it's like 12 to 20 places around the world that are all kind of focused for you in this new life. And then there's this kind of wider network of other ones that are kind of like, within the space. Suddenly that becomes really easy to make the decision.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, how is your product being funded? Because I've seen a few projects that have gone down the investors route, consortium of investors route, or VC, and it's kind of clashed with the investors' want for return on investment, and then the long-term kind of trajectory of what these projects need, because you're creating a society in the end of the day. It's not like a fast, run fast and break things kind of set up. So I have seen some clashes. And then on top of that, there's the, in Southern Europe, you probably wouldn't have an issue, but in other areas, the fact that there's these kind of investors coming into one place and creating this new society in this one place. I mean, I was writing a piece on Destiny, which is in Nevis, St. Kitts and Nevis. They're still in kind of like chats with local governments, and they do want a governance, like a special economic zone. So it is slightly different, but I know that quite a lot of the pushback has been around the fact that these are kind of these rich people from Europe coming over there and deciding to do their own kind of community.
Yeah, neocolonialism. I think we did a whole chat about this last time, didn't we?
I think we did.
Totally.
It's so I feel like it's so integral and it's such a big criticism of these things that it should, I feel like it is front of mind for a lot of people in order for it to be accepted in the societies that they're kind of trying to go into. So yeah, that was a very long kind of roundabout question, but how are you approaching that?
There's two parts to your question, right? Yeah. Two parts to that question, I think. So one is like, okay, you need to get the local government, people, whoever they're on board. And the way you do that is to make sure they feel like they're getting similar value that you're getting by coming there, right? I don't think in essence people have any issue with free movement. I think the issue comes when it's like you're moving there, you get all of the plus and the local people are still left out in the cold. So I think like whatever that looks like, that's the key. Is like, you know, what job creation are you doing? Like, in my opinion, there are two major problems that if you solve, everything will fall into place. One is job creation and the other is getting on the property ladder. If you're saying to this local community, like on an island or in like Uruguay or anywhere, like, okay, we're going to create 5,000 jobs and 5,000 homes, I'm pretty sure you have the rebuttal, like, there for anyone to say anything. Oh, neocolonialism. Well, no, like who else has created 5,000 jobs in this area? Like, and then that kind of shuts it down, right? And I think jobs are great, but it's not the only thing. We've seen that with Prospera. You know, you could be the number one job creator, but you can still get tarnished with the brush. And I think that's where the whole kind of like leveling up of the locals is really important. So like, you don't want them just to have menial security jobs. You want them to be taking advantage of the zone, getting less, maybe perhaps different taxes, maybe entrepreneurial training, and being able to like actually uplift that local community rather than just giving them like a slightly higher paid job. So I think that's like ultimately, you do a bit of research, go into that place, where are the holes that need to be filled within that like economy, and then hopefully add value. And then I think that will, you know, you're never going to stop the trolls. There's always going to be people who are very nationalist and disagree with you and like, but I think that's the appropriate rebuttal, in my opinion.
Okay.
The first question that you asked was around the investment model and clashes with the traditional models. Like I keep saying this, but there is no proper finance vehicle for these types of projects yet. And I think that's kind of part of what I'm trying to do with MBS, which is that like, if I can show a real estate investor that they can get, let's say 15 to 20% ROI in a 2-year or 3-year period, by essentially like being a patron, putting the land up, and then us having these people pay a subscription, vest that land and become owners of that land over that 3-year period. Like the contribution element will allow people to basically be there and have the place become a functioning society. And then the vesting via subscription will allow for the business model and the time frame of that business model to be shortened. And then I think you start to get some interesting kind of conversations happening. Because if you can show that 15 to 20% turnaround in 3 years, then I think that does start to create a business model that's interesting. You know, traditional VC funding and community, you know, the person who knows probably the most about that is John Hillis. So if you want to hit him up, you should speak to him, because, you know, he'll tell you that they don't mix and don't do it. So I think if VC funding is going to play a role in this society stuff, then I think they need to adjust their timeline a little bit on returns. Because, yeah, outside of the real estate thing, you know, if you're looking at companies like myself that are operating and trying to build these societies, yeah, like, you know, 5 years is quite short.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've kept you for a bit longer than I had intended. And on the 5 years is short front, this is going to be a kind of crazy question. But in the next year, we've just got it started 2026. Within this next year, what are you most excited about?
Getting boots on the ground with minimum viable society and seeing if we can create the middle ground between the pop-up and the permanent.
Nice. Okay, that's nice and succinct as well. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah. Always.
Thank you for watching the Utopia and Beta podcast. If you've enjoyed our conversation, like and subscribe to the Utopia and Beta newsletter, where I share conversations and new ideas about how technology is shaping the world around us. If you'd like to comment on something we talked about today, I'd love to hear from you. Comment below and let's start another conversation. All right. Well, yeah, thank you so much for staying on longer than
no worries.
scheduled. And yeah, have a good rest of your day and we'll keep in touch.
Take it easy.
Bye.